Welcome back to the Wine Tech Insiders Podcast, episode 32. We're going into lots of news. Australia pulls out of China, flat bottles, Bordeaux fraud, pairing apps, and wine searches on Google. Back, we have a full slate of our insiders. We have Seb from Trolley.
Good morning.
Jonathan from Bottle Books.
Good afternoon.
Lori from Outshinery.
Hi.
And Nick from Wine Owners.
Hi.
First up, we've touched on this before. In fact, we've touched on all of these topics before, but Australia has had a trade war, a wine trade war with China, and finally pulled out of China. They were doing 1.2 billion Australian dollars, which is about 830 million US dollars, and the 1.2 billion, and now they're down to 200 million in wine sales. So that's that's $1 billion Australian dollars of wine sales just fell over the last. I think this has been going on for about a year. So they pulled their office out. Nick, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, is this part of the kind of the end of globalization and the realignment of the world as we have known it over the last, 20, 30 years?
It's
all related to tariffs, isn't it? And what ends up being competitive for the consumer to buy and what ends up not being competitive. And it's kind of feels like there's a chapter closing in the whole of the old Eastern world is it's going to be a trickier proposition.
Do we know if China's imposed tariffs on wine specifically for any other countries? Any other Western countries? Because I mean, France is in the West,
California,
and Italy's in the West, and California as well.
Because
look, I think we're looking at a much larger problem, a macro kind of a trend where China is emerging as a superpower and as a very large economy that's currently heavily dependent on Western consumption. And Australia obviously is aligning itself quite regularly with the US, right? And it's literally a trade war. It's literally tensions, and it might last. I think it might last, a year, 2 years, 5 years, a couple of years. But I'm a believer in globalization. I think society overall is better off by having countries to be working together and interconnected as smoothly as possible.
Yeah.
But tensions are inevitable. And right now, and especially, I mean, the US started the whole trade war, about 3 years ago, just before COVID, 2018, 2019, they started. And so it's not going to stop. Unfortunately, Australia basically had a really, really, really good customer in China. They basically had most of their eggs in that basket. And it may return. I think it may return in a couple of years' time, but it basically means Australia is going to have to be very creative and very inventive with how they're pushing wines out, because they're currently a net producer. Australia doesn't consume internally, doesn't consume nearly enough. So right now, I'm aware that Austrade, who has had issues and challenges in the last 2 or 3 years as well, not Austrade, sorry, Wine Australia. I know that they're starting to try and push more wines into the US and to Europe as well.
Yeah, so
they're trying to find ways.
The UK is now the largest market for Australian wine,
rosy wines. Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, although we consume half of what China consumed, which, considering our population versus their population, means that we drink a lot.
I mean,
there's no doubt.
Didn't that play a role in how Portugal got on the wine map and port? Was that due to the wars like 200 or 300 years ago, that suddenly it was not possible to buy French wine in the UK, and then another region got lifted up. Portugal got lifted up in the process.
Yeah, I think that rings a bell, and I think that the whole thing with the Irish families in Bordeaux was due to essentially Bordeaux wines essentially being routed through Ireland or bartered against wool in order to get access to the UK market, because that had been shut off directly. So potentially, yeah, there are a lot of kind of British family names down there, aren't there, in the Port region?
Yeah. I know, like, there's a lot of like port. I don't know how they did it, but with a lobbying effort back in the time, but even during like the Prohibition era, even when the one that was happening like in Scandinavia, for example, like Norway had a prohibition. The only alcohol that was allowed legally was port, because it was considered medicine. So you had to go to the doctor. That I found when I was living in Oslo, like I found this like old like comic book, like comic strip, that you put in newspaper, and you have this Norwegian on skis, like all lining up at the doctor prescription, kind of making up ailment, like you used to make up ailment for like getting like cannabis prescription, like, oh, I can't sleep, or I can't digest, or I can't anything. It's like, what you need is sport, what you need is sport, what you need is sport. And it was just like, yeah, it was.
That's the kind of world I want to live in.
Well, speaking of that, there's a new type of plastic bottle, which is shaped a bit like some old medicine bottles, sort of like a flask. So it's a flat pack bottle, so you can pack more in while you're shipping. We've talked about paper bottles. Laurie, what about this new shape? Do you think this might have some legs?
I'm not sure if it has like curves. That's just like more flat, like so legs. I think it is challenging. Like I really appreciate what they're trying to do. Like like the mission to like let's ship less let's ship less weight of glass. But it is just not the most appealing. And I haven't held it in my hand, and I can't imagine it being a nice tactile or haptic experience. And I know we shouldn't be that shallow, but I can see this like a massive barrier to entry. What it has going for, it has like this flask look, so a bit more like from the world of spirits, like whiskey that you used to put in your pocket. What I really appreciate the innovation, and I think like the thinking is right. I think it's going to be tough. And I seem to recall that years ago, Coca-Cola, and I may be making that up, but I thought that Coca-Cola did a little bit something like that, and it didn't go anywhere either. I think there's more education, though. The problem, again, is I'm not sure necessarily that the consumer think of the packaging when buying wine. I think they're sensitive on how the wine is made and the winemaking and how is it good or not good for the environment. I can see them being more alert around that. I'm not sure they're alert about like, did you know that glass is heavy carbon? Like, I'm not sure that the knowledge is there yet. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's look, I appreciate, I really appreciate the fact that you think you might be making stuff up as you're talking to us. But look, ultimately, I agree with you, Laurie. The shape, the flask-like shape is getting really close to spirits. And I'm not sure that the consumer will kind of appreciate that. But this said, we're all aware there is a very significant trend from the new consumers who are aware of issues around climate, issues around the planet, and whether plastic is the solution, I don't know, but it's definitely a massive improvement in terms of cost of shipping and overall carbon footprint due to shipping. And I do think, look, the industry is tremendously traditional. That wine bottle, I mean, how many years did it take for us to get used to a screw cap? And even today, I'm sure you folks in Europe don't see that many screw caps, right? It's cork, it's cork, it's cork, it's cork.
And
that trend is that the screw cap, the cork to screw cap kind of a change has taken decades, and now moving away from the traditional glass bottle, 750 ml bottle, is also going to take decades. But I'd like to think that the how powerful the demand from new consumer is towards more environmentally friendly options or awareness, I think this might surprise us. In the next 5 to 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised that in 10 years' time, we have a lot of wine no longer being bottled in 750 mils, simply because the demand of the consumer, I think we're underestimating how powerful it is, how aware the Gen Z and the double Zs and the kids after that, how aware they are of the mess that has been made out of the planet. And these guys do care, and these guys will go the extra mile to try and find something that really makes a difference, as opposed to be traditional. I think being traditional might even come at a cost, at a price. Right.
We've also been talking about the glass shortages. So adding to the motivation to try alternative packagings, that also can play a role. That if you have to make a change anyway, and people understand, or there's some appreciation of there's a glass shortage, so the bottle's not going to look the same way anyway, then maybe you find some people taking risk that you wouldn't have seen a few years ago, and providing those opportunities for the Gen Z, double Zs, like you said, to demonstrate what they're deciding for their A/B testing.
If I was a winery today considering moving away, or at least trying some plastic bottles, irrespective of the shape, right? Plastic can be shaped into whatever shape. But if I was a winery trying some plastic bottles, I would dedicate a chunk of the label to really clearly and boldly say, this is 60% lighter. This uses, 25 ton less carbon emitted in being transported. I would really try and lean on that really hard, because the consumer wants it.
We have, we do HelloFresh here in Germany, which is many people may know this. It goes by different names in different countries, but basically you get your ingredients delivered with a recipe card, and then you cook it yourself. And over the last few months, we've seen menu cards coming through that explicitly advertise at the top that this had 50% less carbon footprint in logistics, and like that's part. And when you're selecting your menu, which you can see which ones are low carbon footprint menus, and so there is, at least amongst their clients, it seems like there's enough there that they're putting out specific options with low carbon footprint.
So I think the question is going to be, once as a consumer, once the wine, especially for the wine, the slightly older demographics, when the wine arrives in a plastic bottle, are we going to think less of the product? Are we going to feel like it's been cheapened a bit?
Well, I think it depends on the price, right? For commercial wines, we've had that. That's always been sort of the recurring topic, is which part of the market are you looking at? If you're looking at the 10 euro and under market, which is where most of the wine is sold, it doesn't really matter what it's in, as long as it was sealed. And it probably will be, you probably won't see a Margot in that ever, but but you're probably going to you could see some Conchitoros in there from the supermarket.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I wonder, from a environmentally friendly angle, that plastic bottle, I mean, it's plastic and it's made to be looking like an actual bottle, more or less flattened. I wonder really how much more environmentally friendly it is compared to aluminum, right? So cans are far more easily recycled. So ultimately, there is still an argument for cans. There's more space between the cans as they're being shipped, I would assume. But I don't know whether how much we're trying to emulate a bottle, whether that's going to help. Because ultimately what the consumer really wants is convenience, and ultimately to know that they're making a difference, they're trying to make a difference, and they're putting their money where a difference is being made, you know?
Well, in Bordeaux, French supermarket customers have been scammed out of drinking not the wine that they bought. Over 20 arrests. There was a gang who had bought cheap wine from other French regions and from Spain, and they were bottling it at a secret location under the cover of darkness, adding self-printed Bordeaux château labels. What's interesting about this is that there's kind of like an inside thing. It doesn't have to do with China. This is Laurie. Is this really against the French psyche? I mean, is this, could you do no greater crime than this? I mean, this is
it is tough, but like there's always greed somewhere, and I think it's interesting how it's playing on perception. Oh, the French would never do this, like, often you hear from the Chinese news, but it just shows like where's there's like a money opportunity and where there's greed, it's what's happening. Do we know how they found out that the liquid was not the right wine, was counterfeit? Like, do we have?
Apparently, they discovered equipment for printing wine labels during a drugs raid.
So maybe they were dealing drugs and just wine on the side. Maybe this is about the amount of heroin that they were bringing to the country or something.
Well, no, but like what's interesting is like, like money is unequal technically, right? Like for like criminals, and like what do you risk if you smuggle drugs versus what do you risk if you counterfeit wine? Like, both carry a pain if you get caught, but I would imagine, again, I'm not a judge here, but like, not to the same level. So I think what would be curious is how long has it been going on, right? Like, it's just like we talked previously on the podcast how like I think it was Yellowtail that just got, switched on and everything like that. So what's interesting to me with that story is how we're talking about supermarket wine and not so much, the fine wine that belongs more to your world, Nick. Is it like I'm actually like, and Nick, I'm curious because you are really working with a lot of like fine wines from Bordeaux, Burgundy, and beyond. Are these wineries now laughing that even like this bulk wine is getting caught?
I suspect they're not. I suspect this isn't good for anybody because it knocks confidence generally. I mean, in a way, if I were to be sort of controversial, I would say there's, apart from the fraud aspect of this, the product that they were creating isn't that different from what a significant amount of wine branded and sold through platforms like Le Petit Ballon are doing, and I know a chateau owner in France who has a chateau also domain in South Africa, and he found it very hard to sell high-end South African wine, and in the end he basically sourced bulk wine, and he kind of put a little bit of the good juice in it as well, up until the point that it actually tasted quite nice. So that might have been kind of 3% or 4% by volume to begin with. And, and then someone else comes along and kind of blends a slightly richer blend. And then he kind of adds a little bit more of the good juice into his blend of bulk wine under, the same brand in order to kind of, compete. And I think that, apart from the fact that obviously this came from all over the world rather than one country, and clearly, was orchestrated by a chateau owner. So, irrespective of, how many NFTs and various other security devices you might have put on that bottle, wouldn't have made the damnedest bit of difference, of course. But, and we know, of course, that the Bordelais are the masters of the blend. So, you know, in a way, it's happening everywhere all the time, and the only difference is that it had a mise en bouteille au château label on it rather than Yellowtail or, you know, some other branded label, which, you know, might not have been a problem, right?
Yeah, it reminds me also, you know, in the bit, it's not totally my world, but like the world of like counterfeit art that is so good, like painting that, wow, that counterfeit is so good. Does it have almost like value in itself? Like, you know, it's just kind of like questioning, like, what do you put value behind and what is true or what is untrue? Like, it is truly, like you said, bottled at the chateau, like physically, just not bottled what you were advertising.
Yeah, I mean that's the real thing, right? Is it's just the declaration of the label is the issue there. Because I think what I don't know the exact specifics, but I thought that like to be able to declare a wine as French, it only needed to have 5% French juice in it or something, and that's where a lot of the Spanish bulk ends up in is France, and because the amount of French wine that's available in the world far outstrips any reasonable amount of production in the country. So yeah, I mean, to your point, Nick, I mean, when you can blend a good wine, it's still a good wine, right?
Look, I think it's a bit of a shame because reading the news, we don't have a whole lot of information as to have consumers seen the difference. Has it been tasted by the supermarket before being put on the shelves? We don't really. All we know, as Nick was saying, is that it's been discovered by officers during a drug ring. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm reading here that they're estimating that there would have been 100,000 bottles of Spanish wine, which would have been passed off as French wine. But at the same time, there's a thing as a consumer. Hey, it's a good value wine, and I'm enjoying the experience of that little product. Would it have made a difference if it said, we think it's better than Bordeaux and it's half the price from Bordeaux? If we were blatantly just telling the consumer, this is not a Bordeaux wine, but guess what? It's better and it's cheaper.
And it's blended by a master of his art.
Correct. And look, I think the whole NFT topic and provenance tracking topic is interesting. In this case, because we're underestimating the creative fiber of the winemakers today, right? The way that winemakers are taking a certain style of juice and certain amount of sweetness and like literally blending it or developing it into a final product. If we were capable as a consumer to really start identifying the winemaker, the person who's crafted, the artist behind the product, more than just the brand, I think there might be some legs to that. Same as the fake tableau, right? The fake art. If it's the genuine artist, you're willing to pay more. If that artist does different things, you're going to follow them. If it's a copy, okay, look, it's just as good, but it's a copy. And I think winemakers in the world of wine are massively underrepresented and don't really have the spotlight they should be getting. They are the true artist in what we're trying to do, right?
We also came across another great article this week about just in general that food and drink tasting pairings are ridiculous. A very good article by Jason Wilson. He goes on a bit of a rant, personally and professionally. But he makes some great points that point to, I think, the struggles of wine technology to do this pairing. There's a lot of apps that try to make this pairing. And so basically he makes, I think, 5 main points. Most wine is not with food. So 60% of the wine consumed by the high frequency wine drinkers isn't with food. It's really a kind of a new world problem in a way. In the old world, you just drink the local wine and eat the local food, and that works because it's been developed over hundreds of years. There's too much choice. So, there's a paralyzation of all of this choice and all of these options. what I hadn't heard before, which was very interesting, was that your individual saliva can affect the way that, so that can happen. And then as he finishes off the article, even your mood makes a difference. So if you're pissed off, if you're happy, whatever, you're going to taste things differently. Jonathan, what did you think about this?
I thought it was great. I mean, I think all those are valid ways of slicing and dicing, the topic, and why we have, after all these years of trying to do pairing, why there has never been a breakthrough pairing app that has made it just on the basis of pairing. You have anecdotes of increasing sales through wine recommendations here and there, but nothing that's really broken through. And yeah, New World versus Old World, having an over selection in New World compared, like in the US, compared to in the Old World, where you really don't have that much selection, so it's easier to make a decision. I think also sometimes price makes a difference, because like in the US, it does cost you a bit more to make a mistake than it does in the older world, where you have really good wines at half the price of what you get them in the US. And yeah, it does really, challenge any of those companies out there that are saying we can solve the world of wine by having a better recommendation engine. It's a pretty big challenge.
Like for me, the recipe pairing, thing like that, it's just another point of entry to help. So pairing in itself shouldn't be exactly. I don't see like the be all and all, like solving the main issue. To me, it just gives, if that one can give it another point of entry, like a reference point to help a consumer project themselves, like how am I going to enjoy that wine? Like just kind of like something that's just like, it's not intimidating. It doesn't, we're not talking about like full body tannin, things like that. It's just like, great with Thanksgiving dinner with friends. I think like the article mentioned as well, like kind of like the occasion, like, oh, this is a wine to share. This is a wine to keep for yourself with like a delicious chocolate when nobody's watching. I would almost say that, okay, that's food pairing, but more as a pretext. Like I think it can be like if done well, like just another entry point of like storytelling and helping the consumer project how it fits in their lives. At the end of the day, the chances are the consumer is never, ever going to do that exact recipe that you suggest. I would say it's 99% certain. Like it's not going to happen. But sometimes it can be a differentiator. There's two Malbec from Argentina that have roughly the same price point, and one is giving me a bit more information that's telling me that, there's a greater chance that's what my friend would be making for dinner, and I'm bringing the bottle. This is the one I'm going to bring because it says it goes well with tapas, and I'm pretty sure we're having appetizer at the beginning. That's the kind of food pairing. Again, not for all the wine, but I can see working. Yeah. Sorry, it was a bit of a rant here, but like mostly the social food pairing, I would put it more that way, like the occasion of the food, maybe more than the food itself.
It's look from my perspective, I think the whole idea of pairing. So we mentioned how many wines are being produced around the world, right? The fragmentation of the market, how many different products there is. There's too many products for consumers to truly be able to know what they want at large, right? Generally speaking, consumers, they walk into bottle shops and they're not so sure. They kind of have a rough idea, really. And the food pairing is really just an avenue to try and say, well, look, if you happen to have fish tonight, this might be a good match. I think the product is so complex that it's probably, look, it's marketing. It's marketing more than anything, right? I'm having fish. I'm having tuna fish. Oh, I'm having a white fish. Oh, I'm having. I think Laurie is touching an interesting point here, and I also feel the new demographics, the new generations. I'm not sure that they care so much for how many points that wine got, and is it a good fit? Is it not a good fit? I think the experience behind it, and that's where the wine industry is really all about, the experience, especially the wine industry. And how do we communicate that experience? How do we allow people to remind themselves of how great of a wine this was, and you need to have it again. It's going to be as good of a moment again. I think this is where things are developing more and more, far more than, look, I mean, food pairings are probably going to be around for a bit longer. It's a good marketing little thing, right? I don't want to, as a consumer, I don't want to think too much about it. I just want a great bottle of wine with that kind of a dish. Okay, somebody just tell me, right? I don't want to make the decision.
And apparently, it's also Google searched. Like I don't have the number in front of me, but like we did way back our channel, we did a bit of an article on like recipe and food pairing, and it is a really common what goes well with lamb. Like it's just not see like the recipe of lamb or thing like that, and it's oversimplifying, but I think there's still a bit of this appetite, and it's not. I would argue not see just for the taste, but it's also for the person not to feel dumb at the table. I think there's a part of smartness to wine that food is a nice entry point to go with it, because you can talk about it at the dinner table, and that's why I think it's more the social aspect, like the conversation piece, maybe more than the taste bud piece.
It's interesting. Because look, I do think. Sorry, David. I do think that taste and the pairing is very subjective, and ultimately, I use quite often the example of dark, like tart cherries, big tart cherries. I was born in Quebec, and the cherries we get on the market are imported from bloody Mexico or whatnot, and they land on the shelves and they're dark and they're plump and they're sweet and they're soft. I then moved to Australia as a young teen, and in Australia, the second they come off, when they're in season in December, they are massive, they're crunchy, they're red, they're crisp. So when I read behind a label hints of dark cherries or tart cherries, which one are you referring to? Right? It's completely subjective, and whether you're going to like this one with a piece of lamb, there are some trends of acidity versus fat versus okay, I kind of get that, but genuinely it's all subjective.
We have some trends from Google and wine searches. I'm going to give a couple of stats and then just hit one of you up and get a reaction for the end of this. Jonathan, I'm going to start with you. Vin Naturel natural wine saw a threefold increase. What do you know about that? Have you seen that?
No, I think it's the trends by market. I guess you have to look at where the search is happening. This is something that I would have been surprised to see that increase in the UK, because I think those trends are already a bit more established in the UK. If this is more speaking to like the US, I could see a trend like that taking off there due to some marketing campaign. But I think in certain markets, this is already very well established.
Really? So you're suggesting that the natural wines are more established and more understood and more mature in the European market versus the American market?
I wouldn't necessarily group all of the Europe into one, but I would sort of say that the trends tend to follow, at least from what we see from events, the trends tend to start in the UK and then percolate over through the Netherlands, perhaps into Denmark, and then perhaps out from there. But it's definitely not uniform at all. But if you look at vegan wines and stuff, like the UK has that trend started in the UK ages ago. And
I think there is a question, which is what is defined as natural wine these days as well, because there are two pretty sort of polar ends of the spectrum, and I think producers are now getting into making much more natural winemakers that were on the kind of fairly extreme end, people in high quality growing areas too, such as Etna, are now making natural wines with an absolute minimal amount of additive just before bottling, such that they still qualify as being natural wines, and frankly they're brilliant.
And David, to go back onto your number, growing threefold, I think we need to be mindful that the concept
was
of
the first
natural
fold?
wine was it. Yeah, and exactly. If you're starting with 100 hectoliters and you're going to 300, well, it's a threefold increase. And ultimately in the world of wine, this is a new trend, so it's going to keep growing. I think it also goes back to the consumer demand, where consumers are increasingly wanting something that's not manipulated, not full of sugar, not mass produced, not increasingly there's an amount of transparency in the food and beverage industry, and consumers are seeking whatever it means to be natural, whatever it means to be biodynamic and or organic, and minimal intervention, and in line with that, minimal impact on the planet. Not look that most consumers still buy at a bottle shop, right? But if we're capable of pushing the message through the label or in some way, shape, or form that this wine is natural, this wine is biodynamic, this wine has X and Y and Z characteristics which impact the planet in a good way, I do think these wines will keep on selling more and more and more, at least for the next decade. Give it a good decade before another trend or another fad kind of comes in.
Well, even hotter than natural wines, fivefold increase in non-alcoholic wines. Laurie, are you seeing a lot more non-alcoholic wines?
We've seen a lot more lighter wines. We've been doing at our channel a lot of visual asset, like visual product content for lighter. I'm talking 6.5%. So usually they go like lighter alcohol, and right away it's also like lighter calories. So usually that goes hand in hand. So we've seen a lot of that. Honestly, we've seen a little bit, like, via osmosis, like there's a brand that we saw. But I would say for us, just like, and it looks like almost like the wineries are approaching it as there's two ways that we see it. Sometimes they take one non-established, like their flagship Chardonnay or something like that, and they do the light version of it, which makes me want to taste it to see how it compares, because I think the winery is like obviously building the image of like something that's very famous, and then but how does that translate? And sometimes just like really pure new brand play of like being light and proud of it, but not a ton of fully de-alcoholized. I gotta say, I had a friend that did dry January or whatever that is. I've never done it in my life, but and she bought some expensive non-alcoholic wine, and it was terrible. Like it was really not good grape juice, and it's just like, yeah. I'm curious about that. I think lighter, you get a better taste, and you still have the marketing and what the consumer is wanting. Totally de-alcoholized, I'm not sold, because for me, the wines that I've tested a few, they just taste terrible. The one
Look, I think I'm not personally a big fan of alcohol-free wine or low alcohol wines. It's I agree with Laurie. For everything I've tasted, I'm yet to be convinced that it's a suitable replacement to wine. But I think the argument is that it's not meant to be a replacement. It's meant to be a slightly different drink, same as alcohol-free beers, which were shit 15 years ago, and are increasingly, look, not bad, right? It's an interesting drink. And I was reading recently, I mean, most of you would have seen around the world, there's an increasing amount of pressure to decriminalize weed or marijuana or pot or whatever you call it. And it's now been decriminalized, borderline legalized in many Western countries. I am now seeing an increasing amount of, okay, well, should we just decriminalize hard drugs to just try and break down the cartels and try and break down? So the whole point here is that there's a trend, there's a movement towards what is criminal, what is not criminal, and to a certain extent, the way we're controlling alcohol, the way we're controlling wine, it's still intoxicating people. And the whole drinking in moderation is a challenge, and you're seeing the industry fighting as to, should we or should we not drink wine? And I think there's a much larger trend that's kind of shaping up towards, let's call it, responsible, conscious consumption. You don't have to get shit-faced to enjoy a good wine, or you don't have to have a whole bottle. If you're 4 of you, you don't need to have 4 bottles to enjoy the product. And I think what we're seeing with the alcohol-free wines is the other extreme. People who are basically saying, I don't want to get shit-faced. I don't want to get intoxicated. I still want to enjoy the product. So I think it'll keep growing.
Nick, there's all this noise about these trends and everything, but still the top 3 churches are Champagne, Bordeaux, and Burgundy. I mean, it's incredible that these brands, these regions are just so powerful still.
Yeah, and they are rather self-selecting as well, because it's the people who enjoy fine wine, if you like, who are doing all the searches, I suspect. It's the power of the regional brand.
Is it fair to say we're also looking at,
sorry?
It's decades in the making, right? Champagne has been working as a region to protect the name Champagne around the world, not for 5-10 years. We're talking decades. We're talking in the 60s they were working at it. So we've been educated that this is such an icon. Bordeaux is such an icon. So yes, look, these regions are way ahead of any other regions in the world. Napa is doing a pretty decent job at it.
Fantastic job, I think. Yeah,
they're doing a good job. But at the same time, I think Napa is increasingly not overpricing itself. They're getting the money they're able to get out of the product. But it's a challenge for most consumers, right? You can find a pretty decent champagne bottle for less than $100. Napa wines less than $100. So there's still a bunch of them, but less and less and less and less, right? Yeah. Capitalism at its best. Did I just say that?
And overall, wine searches on Google were up 30% since 2019. This year was 6%. Is that in line? Does that sound right? Seb, what are you thinking? What are you seeing from e-commerce? Does that follow?
Look, it's interesting. E-commerce is very, very strong, right? We deal with small wineries, generally speaking, and e-commerce. Anyone who's been ready to sell wine online, digitally, touch-free, curbside pickup / delivery, has done really well in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. The wineries who've had challenges with e-commerce was really those wineries who didn't really do much marketing, much emailing and social media and different things. But generally, e-commerce is really good. I am surprised that wine searches are up 30%. Because I can't explain why.
In the period 2019 onwards, right? So that kind of correlates with when
during COVID
would have stopped drinking in restaurants and bars.
Yeah, okay, fair point.
To drinking at home, and therefore, either they had a favorite e-com shop, or they used Google to try and find one that they were interested in buying from. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does
make sense. The fact
that
it's dropped off down to plus 6% at this point, now the world's opened up and the restaurants are full, kind of makes sense too.
Yeah, because look, I think we know, broadly speaking, that wine consumption is growing worldwide marginally on a sort of a decade by decade. Wine is still growing. We're looking at a not quite $400 billion a year kind of a market. So it's a decent sized market, growing about 4% a year. But when you look at spirits and cocktails and craft beers / non-alcoholic beers, these are growing much faster. And that's where wine is really sort of a stable, whereas the other ones are really peaking. Whether they're going to keep on growing is a different topic. But wine, I don't see that wine is really adjusting well to the new trends and the new ways that consumers want to be communicated with.
Well, that was episode 32 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. I'd like to thank our insiders, Lori from Outshinery, Nick from Wine Owners, Seb from Trolley. We'll see you all in a few weeks.
Nice one, guys. Catch you later. Ciao.